So I'm basically a very old man, but somehow my work has managed not to stagnate. And I think that that is because of discovering the idea of play and utilizing that in my work. My definition of play is basically research into stuff that doesn't feel like research. If that idea is interesting to you, then this video might be interesting to you. What's up? This is MVA Joshua. Super short intro on this one. This video is just a dude driving down the street talking about the creative process and what he's figured out, and also trying to get into some very tactical, action-oriented stuff that you can use to try to figure out how to reinvent your creative process. Check it out. Leave any comments if you got questions. Love to hear from you. In my type studio classes this semester, on Mondays, we've been doing these in-class workshops. Last night's was modified typography. So we printed out letter forms, and then using scissors and X-Acto knives and markers and whiteout and glue sticks and whatnot, we just played with ways that we can manipulate and mess with letter forms. A couple of weeks ago, we did a handmade type class. So I brought in paint, crayons, other mark making tools. We each had a small set of letter forms to work with, and then we just made stuff. Pretty much just explored. I set the goals for these kinds of workshops really, really low. All I care about is not getting hung up on concepts and making lots of stuff and being totally fine with making bad stuff. So they end up being fairly fun, and we don't really critique stuff. We just share what we've made, essentially as a kind of research. I always take advantage of being able to do this, and I was talking with my class last night. I was talking about, I jump right into doing this stuff, but it's not like this is a thing I normally do. I take advantage of these opportunities to where there's a context that I can just play and explore and try things I've never tried before. What occurred to me this morning, though, is that it's actually not true that I don't do this kind of open-ended play and research in my work. That there's two things going on that have changed. The first one is that my entire process tends towards play on some level. Even when I have a somewhat defined idea of what I'm going to do, it looks like play. So a really small example of that is yesterday I was working on a new Halifax cover. It's called Buried at Sea. I knew I was going to use something kind of watery, and I planned on going through my own photography. And then I thought, well, why don't I just look through Unsplash? Maybe I'll find something cool to modify that's more explicitly water. I downloaded a whole bunch of stuff, and then I just spent time playing with these images and seeing what I could do with them and how I could crop them and so on and so forth. In that example, I had an idea of what to do. It depends on how conceptual I want to say it is, but there was a clearly defined thing of I was thinking about water. I planned on staying away from it too explicitly, but as I was playing with these images, I was like, oh, this looks good. The big difference between how I would do that kind of thing now and how I would have done that years ago is that years ago I would have had a really specific image in my head, and then it wouldn't have felt like play to try to make it. It would have felt like work because I'm trying to construct this thing, and on top of that I was probably gonna fail because that image in your head so rarely comes to fruition. A thing I used to believe and I've kind of gotten rid of is that once I got comfortable with that idea that I was gonna have an image in my head, that I was gonna make it and it wasn't gonna work out, and that was where the adventure began. Eventually I realized, well, don't even have an image in your head. Maybe have a loose idea of something you might do. And I think I talk about this a lot, the idea of well, I could do this or I might do this is a kind of language of liberation. So that's one way that how I'm working tends more towards a model of play or experimentation. Bigger thing that I realized was how explicitly about play or open-ended research my actual design process has become. If you are a friend of the vlog, you may have seen the video where I was showing how I designed the gradient expansion CD. That project has a chunk that looks like work in that it's more strategic, conversation with the client, collaborative. Then it has a period of complete and total play that resembles, maybe not quite as loose as what I did in class last night, but okay, I'm gonna make drawings. Okay, I'm gonna make gradients. Okay, I'm gonna play with modifying type to try to make it disappear. And then that play period ends and it goes back into a thing that kind of looks like work or traditional graphic design. Of course, it's not, because again, I think just the way I've grown to approach work, it's much more free and fun than it's been for most of my career. But eventually it gets back to a point of making a deliverable. I've been quite intentional about doing that, down to the various methods that the MVA has, besides the fact that they're about setting up rules and gamification and whatnot. Many of them have as a general prerequisite an open-ended period of play with loose rules. Two kind of wrap it up ideas. One, I think my work has gotten dramatically better from doing that. And two, the work is really fun from doing that. Now, there is nothing more annoying than people who make pronouncements about how your or my creative work should be conducted or what it's about. I don't think that every designer should be dedicating their time toward play or visual research or whatever. I think it would be wise to devote a little bit of time in order to see how it jives with you and whether it's a thing you should be devoting more time to. But I don't think everybody should be doing it. But what's really important is the degree to which your work can change for the better and be more gratifying if the way in which you do it is aligned with the ways in which you want to spend your time or what you find creatively challenging. That could be more immersion in trends. It could be a deeper interest in like the idea of sampling, a la Peter Saville. It could be deeper dives into research. But in general, if you can figure out what makes you tick and then pump that back into the work, the changes are really profound. I think the biggest and most important one is the way that it eliminates procrastination. Typically, my biggest problem on September 22nd, 2019 is I'm still a bum and I procrastinate on stuff that sucks, but on work that should bring me joy, I don't push it off. Now, if you're watching this and you're like, okay, that's all well and good, but how do I concretely put this into action? I think there's a few things that you can do. One is you can go to the mva.com, go to how we work, and go to methods. That outlines these creative methodologies we use. I think the two that you would want to read about are the typographer method and the producer method. They're explained in enough detail that you could use it as an assignment sheet. You could also go to the mva.com, and if you go way down to the bottom in the footer, there is a thing that's going to say something like GD 2612, which is a graphic design class, and that has assignment sheets and probably videos from a design class that uses a more conventional concept-based method. You could get the Kenneth Hebert books from the library. Those detail out actual design methodologies. Another thing that you could do is just look for articles, interviews, lectures, where people explain what they're doing, and then you could recreate the steps. Don't recreate the work, right? You could look at an interview with Peter Saville. He seems quite attuned to what was going on in the work that he was doing, especially I think the really famous work of the late 70s. If you forget about the specific references, you have a methodology. There's a lot of examples like that. That's a place to start, and then make some personal work using different methods and see what stuff feels right, or what stuff is compelling, or what stuff you want to do more of. That'll start to be the clues of where your personal practice needs to go and what your particular methodology should be or should be most of the time.
The next episode of the vlog is called Notes on Using Type, and in it I'm going to share about 5 projects from the last 20 years, just looking at how the process and how I use type has changed in that time. Here's a clip. I had finally given myself permission not to give a shit and not to need a reason to do things other than like it feels right. So all I knew is I wanted to make something that seemed cold and kind of icy. Like I didn't care about if it had a meaning. So I just started laying this thing out, trying to make it look as mechanical as humanly possible. Just all caps, accidents, grotesque, medium, condensed. Mostly just playing with like surface and really minimal color palettes and exploring layering. These things ended up being like my favorite thing I'd ever made.